Hi, welcome to 5 Minutes of Torah with the BI Rabbi. I'm by myself in my office, so I don't need this mask on, but I'm feeling the darkness, honestly, of this moment this week. And the mask reminds me almost of the anonymity that people desire when they do awful things, but the brazenness with which they remove the mask when they do awful things. I'm thinking and feeling and speaking as someone who lives in Canada, but is an American citizen, someone who spent his first 30 years in the US, except for a few in Israel, someone whose family is all in the US. And it's just so awful what I saw happen there in the US Capitol on Wednesday. What I read and saw and heard Thursday as more footage and audio and articles were published. A violent mob urged on at a rally from which they came by the sitting president, breaking into the Capitol building, holding weapons, calling for people, including the vice president, to be attacked, yelling and screaming for the exact opposite of a peaceful transition of power to take place. Actually, for no transition of power to take place. After over 160 million people voted in the recent election down in the US, and that's in a country where most years a large percentage of eligible voters don't even vote. This was the most who had ever voted. I wondered initially if I should even talk about this on Shabbat or in our weekly video now, given that we're here in Canada. We're close to the US, but we're not in the US. Maybe it's their problem and not ours. But I realize that it does affect us. It affects us as Jews and as Canadians, and I'll share why. But first, I want to share something from Rabbi Shlomo Zuckier. He teaches at Nishmat Institution in New York. He's also a postdoctoral fellow at McGill. He said that as these violent images streamed into our homes, he said, I couldn't help but think of the Talmud's description of the pain of a nation when the sacred spaces are defiled. In Ezekiel, we get description of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple with the phrase, and the raiders entered and defiled it. And the rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud, they understand this verse to mean that the temple was defiled from the very moment enemy soldiers entered. Upon the soldiers' first steps into the holy territory, all the items belonging to the temple immediately lost their sanctity. And he's right, it's a good parallel. Watching the Capitol building get its windows smashed, and I was working all day, I had meetings all day Wednesday, so I didn't see a lot of this until Wednesday night or Thursday. But watching those windows get smashed and seeing domestic terrorists sitting in the chair of the president of the Senate with their feet up, it seems that the items belonging to the temple, to that temple, the seat of power, had lost their sanctity. And as Canadians, well, I'm just a permanent resident, not a citizen, but I've been here 4.5 years now. The Toronto Star had an article back in November quoting a poll that nearly 1 in 5 Canadians agree with Donald Trump's assertion that he didn't lose at all and the election was unfair. And with the internet and social media, we watch much of the same news and see a lot of the same posts online as those in the US and other countries. The president of the institute that did that poll said many Canadians appear to be hesitant about the US now. Strange feelings when we used to have such a partnership between the two countries. And what about as Jews? How does the storming of the Capitol in the US affect us as Jews? Well, besides just our values, we only have to look at the clothing some of the insurrectionists were wearing. One t-shirt said, literally, Camp Auschwitz, work brings freedom. And that picture and video of that person, that man wearing that t-shirt, is all over the place on the internet. Another shirt said 6MNE. It's so awful I can barely say it. It is an acronym that means 6 million not enough. How utterly awful and scary that prior to 2 days ago, this would be unbelievable, but so scary that men and women wearing such words would be storming and successfully storming the Capitol building of one of the most powerful nations on earth. The Rabbinical Assembly, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, several other institutions of our conservative movement put out a statement that day, I think in the evening. And one of the things it said at the end was that the basis for democracy stems from the Torah's belief that every person is created equally in God's image and is therefore entitled to equal representation in government and equal protection under the law. Each week we pray during our Shabbat worship, we have this in our Siddur, we say it every week, That God uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. We can read it more carefully this week. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many people and faiths who dwell in our nation. We say this here about Canada, but our friends and relatives and co-religionists within our movement and other movements in synagogues in the U.S. say it each week about the United States of America. The statement finished up by saying this prayer is more than an expression of faith. It is a call to action, and we have much work to do to help heal the deep wounds and divisions which afflict the United States and society. There are a lot of divisions down in the U.S. and many places in the world, and the images and sounds and videos coming from Washington, D.C. on Wednesday only showed us that more and more, that terrorism and insurrection can happen anywhere, even the places you least expect it. Shabbat Shalom. I hope everyone has a happy and a healthy Shabbat.